The Catchmoon Kitgun, at one point the most used weapon in the entire game. It dominated the entire game. It was so very good. Everyone and their mum was using one. Here are the stats, actual numbers from that era. At around Mastery Rank 10, about 7.5% of people were using it. By the time we get to Mastery Rank 20, the usage goes up to 40%. And once we get to Mastery Rank 27 or above, more than half of the entire population of the game was using a Catchmoon gun. And you know what the funny thing is? Even though Catchmoons got nerfed, they are stronger now than they were when these numbers were released. I'm of course talking about secondary Catchmoons. Primary Catchmoons weren't added until much later on. Generally, the parts you would go for was the Catchmoon Chamber, the Killstream Loader and the Haymaker Grip for maximum crit chance, damage and critical multiplier. All these parts are still available from Root Zood in Fortuna, which is also where you put the Kitgun together. The main downsides of the Catchmoon nowadays are its relatively limited range, with its fall-off starting at 8 meters, ending at 16 meters, and the projectile disappearing at 20 meters, and its lack of headshot multiplier. This is actually, fun fact, one of the guns that's responsible for AoE weapons not having a headshot multiplier anymore. It's just too damn easy to headshot with them. However, the limited range of the Catchmoon isn't as much of an issue as you might think, because the Catchmoon forces an impact proc on any enemy hit as long as they're within 8 meters of you. This was useless back in the day, but nowadays it's actually very good. So let us bring the Catchmoon into the modern era, shall we? We're gonna start off with secondary Merciless for damage and reload speed. We're gonna follow that up with a secondary Pax Seeker for extra projectiles that burst out of the enemy on a headshot kill, and we're gonna run Lethal Momentum for projectile speed. We're gonna slap in Hemorrhage, which gives us a 70% chance to get a slash proc on an impact proc, Galvanized Diffusion for multi-shot, Lethal Torrent for fire rate and multi-shot, Galvanized Crosshairs for crit chance and even more crit chance on headshot kills, Primed Target Cracker for crit damage, Creeping Bullseye for crit chance and a little bit of negative fire rate, and we're gonna top it off with Primed Heated Charge for heat and a Primed Expel mod for faction damage. One thing that's worth pointing out though is that Galvanized Shot provides multiplicative damage to the Catchmoon, so if you have a different polarization setup, you can replace either Primed Heated Charge, Creeping Bullseye or Galvanized Crosshairs with Galvanized Shot. The simulacrum test you're about to see will have 10 Corrupted Butchers and 10 Corrupted Heavy Gunners in Steel Path at level 150. This is an ideal for testing because once we exhaust the Butchers, we will have no enemies to reliably kill with headshots rather than slash damage over time, so our Galvanized Crosshairs will fall off, so we lose a bunch of crit there. However, in the normal game, you always have plenty of smaller enemies to do headshot kills on so that you can keep your Galvanized Crosshairs up. The damage this setup does is very high. It does more than enough damage to deal with the entirety of Steel Path unless you decide to go deep into endless missions. The setup is somewhat limiting though. You always need to aim down sights to activate Galvanized Crosshairs, which limits your movement, and you constantly need to feed headshot kills to Galvanized Crosshairs to keep it up. Though with the Catchmoon that's not that difficult because the projectile is quite big and it has infinite enemy punch through. However, if you'd rather prefer to run a more faff-less build, you can run this instead. This once again starts off with secondary Merciless for damage and reload speed, but for the secondary we run Pax Charge to give us rechargeable ammo. Then we once again use Lethal Momentum in the Exile slot, follow that up with Hemorrhage for slash procs, Galvanized Diffusion for multi-shot, Lethal Torrent for fire rate and multi-shot, then we run Primed Pistol Gambit for crit chance with Primed Target Cracker for critical damage, and we top it off with Primed Heated Charge for a ton of heat with Frostbite and Pistol Pestilence for viral and status. This setup provides far less damage because you're mostly sitting in yellow crit territory, but you don't have to aim down sight, and you don't have to fuff around with expel mods. It also provides its own viral damage, so unlike with the first setup, you don't have to rely on a companion or a Warframe or even another weapon to get viral on the enemies. The trade-off in damage is quite noticeable though. It starts to fall off at Steel Path level 130 or 140, and by the time you get to 150, Eximus units are gonna be an absolute nightmare. At that point, you will have to combine the weapon with something like Harrow to give it more crit. Also, Galvanized Aptitude is even better on this setup, so if you can, replace Prime Heated Charge with it. Secondary Catchmoons, as mentioned already, are stronger than ever. Yes, they lost a bunch of range, and they don't have a headshot multiplier anymore, but the addition of Galvanized mods, secondary Arcanes, and the addition of Hemorrhage made them stronger than ever. So I would highly recommend you give one of these a shot again, because you might be surprised with the amount of damage they can do. And as always guys, I thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video and found it helpful. If you'd like to support the channel, you can check out the memberships and stuff down below, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.